Joe Biden has been inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States of America. Will it make any difference? By which I mean, will it make life better for ordinary American folk and for the people of the world? Well, there's no way of telling right now. Let's have a look at the history of inaugurations and ask, what does inauguration mean? Why do we have them? What does it represent? And within the confines of this constitution and institution, is real change possible?
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office
of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution
of the United States.
So help me God.
The word inauguration means to instill under good omen and to consecrate power. The consecration of power means to acknowledge that power as sacred. That means, God given power. It also provides a kind of continuity. Obviously, I'm an English person. We live in a monarchy where the continuity of the nation's identity is provided by the changing monarch, the idea that, the king is dead, long live the king. But in America, a republic, a sense of continuity is achieved through these inaugurations. That even though this dude's off, we're still a country. That's why Trump is such a radical guy, because he made the presidency about himself, bringing individualism, a secondary narrative in American life, but a very, very powerful one, to the forefront, sort of throwing around all the constitutional artifacts and the prestiges and protocols that we associate with the presidency. So Biden coming in, he is certainly a return to a more traditional sense of power, plus you have Kamala Harris, female, non-white, which at least in terms of image represents a degree of change.
ABC News presents Inauguration 73. Ceremonies at the White House, the Capitol, and coverage of the inaugural parade. Brought to you by the Savings and Loan Foundation on behalf of your nearby Savings and Loan Association.
In those days, advertising was a bit more straightforward, less crafty and insidious. We're going to be inaugurating Richard Nixon, and here's those chums of yours down the old bank.
They want you to know how money works.
They want you to know how money works.
And by Firestone.
All right, also Firestone. They want you to know what our tyres work.
Now from Washington, ABC News correspondents Harry Reasoner and Howard K. Smith.
There was a lot more breathing space in the news in them days. Howard's here. And look at him, he's just looking at his papers and that. He's not bothered. These days they're on you, aren't they? Okay, it's the news, you bastard! Oh!
Good morning from the nation's capital and welcome to the 47th inauguration of a President of the United States.
Oh, I like it. In all the days, aren't they? It's all nice, it's all cosy. Like at this inauguration of Joe Biden, Lady Gaga's going to do a song, J.Lo's going to do a song. Then Tom Hanks, Bruce Springsteen, Demi Lovato, John Legend, John Bon Jovi. It's weird, isn't it? Because it just shows you that, a nation is a myth and you've got to bring the sort of icons of that nation together to sort of show you, see, everything's okay. And nothing makes me feel more reassured than Tom Hanks showing up. And I mean that in all sincerity. I only wish he was showing up as a president. Then I would completely relax. Who's president now? Geezer out of Big, Geezer out of Castaway, Geezer what lived in that airport without any aggro for ages. He's been to bloody space. He's a reliable, good bloke. Tom Hanks. It's what you want, it's what you get. Tom Hanks ain't going to shaft us. Tom, we're going to continue drone strikes on the Yemen. Oh, I don't know about that. That doesn't seem right. No, you're right, Tom. What was you thinking? Tom, we're going to let Apple and Google and all those guys run things. But what about the honest-to-God, good American people? No, you're right, Tom. Sorry. Tom Hanks. That's what I'm arguing for.
This is the south portico of the White House, the rear entrance, sometimes more nobly called the diplomatic entrance. Usually presidents leave for their inauguration not from this entrance, but from the north entrance, the front entrance. But for reasons of his own, President Nixon wants to start the inauguration here at the south portico.
He was a jittery wreck, Nixon, by all accounts, and even this guy has got a bit of a heads up on it for reasons of his own. The president wants to start here at this unusual doorway. Oh my God, I'm a bag of nerves. This is my big day. What if it goes wrong?
Howard, we're assembling the audience here. At the moment, they're listening to the choir of the Combined Service Academies in weather that is not quite as good as President Nixon might have expected from what Washington was getting earlier in the week.
This was happier time. All right, we're about to have Watergate. All right, there's the Vietnam War. But we still got time to say, well, you would have thought the weather might have been a bit better.
At 11 o'clock, it's 41 degrees here. They don't expect it to go higher than 50. The wind is gusty.
Really focusing down on that weather. It's quite windy, actually. It's not like he's been impeached twice. I mean, it's all sorts of, when you look at how it's become this great gory, mad spectacle now. In them days, even America seemed sort of like a bit more chilled, huh?
It's normally 12 miles an hour, but it's been blowing a few papers around.
I mean, if you look at this. This is my favorite bit of paper, actually, and it's taken a real hiding from these 12-mile parts. Did you see that?
And there is now not much chance that there will be any further rain. They're mostly here. The service academy strode in briskly. The congressman straggled in.
He's actually evaluated the walking pace of the various members of the congregation. One guy had a little bit of a limp. I don't know if that means he's necessarily villainous, although in a movie that would be an indication that the way he moves is suspect, although I recognize that good people could have a limp too, and I certainly want to make a judgment on that basis. Oh, there goes the old paper again. The wind's picking up.
They're assembled, and we'll be ready to go as soon as you get the president down here, Howard.
Meanwhile, in other news, this is what's going on. Trump's marching out of office. We're doing this live. You might be watching it 24 hours later or so. But look, I mean, Christ, in real time, look at what news looks like. Terrifying spectacle. I'd like to go back to these lovely old granddads doing the news.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. So help me God.
On a serious note, Nixon's presidency wasn't much cause for optimism because the weight of the office and the requirements of the position were too much for anybody's idealism. I've seen sort of quite sympathetic things about Richard Nixon, who's sort of really trying his best and all that kind of stuff. Well, it went incredibly wayward, and his name has become a byword for corruption in American politics, and in fact a stick to beat the current outgoing president with, even Nixon did this and even Nixon done that. He sort of remains, I think perhaps as well because his name is slightly villainous with that X there in the middle of it, like he is a byword for sort of corruption and failed presidency.
The bells always signal Inauguration Day's traditional beginning, the church services. The Reagans met with the Carters at the White House.
Reagan, that's the president of my childhood. It was a simpler time. Star Wars, actual film, Star Wars project, a made-up thing. The president's called Reagan. Everything's simple.
Well, I think the president-elect and his wife will enjoy the new one.
It's sort of very colloquial and friendly. Would like to enjoy your new home, buddy. I've left some blue paper in there. Everything should be fine with you. Now, he ain't showing up. There's terrible fear of assassinations. I mean, maybe, though, I am being tricked by that kind of nostalgia that is mobilised by populist thinkers. Reagan is about to bring about a doctrine that creates more inequality than ever before. He's creating a presidency that becomes about performance and iconography as opposed to substance. But to look back on it somehow, it seems quite good.
He closed on an inspirational note as he told the story of Martin Treptow, a young soldier who was killed in France during World War I.
He had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
He's nearly making himself cry there at his own beauty. But this, we now know, is, skilled rhetoric delivered by an actor. I mean, looking back at it from a more cynical perspective, you could see the way the wind was blowing. Look, let's get someone who can actually deliver these fucking lines properly.
With God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. God bless you and thank you.
Durkheim wrote, "There can be no society which does not feel the need of upholding and reaffirming at regular intervals the collective sentiments and the collective ideas which make its unity and its personality. The inauguration is one such time, one such occasion where the country reiterates to itself what it's about." I don't know what kind of sense of polarisation there was at the inauguration of Reagan or Nixon. I know America has troubles because a country of that size with that power is always going to have troubles, but I can't imagine for a moment that it was the degree of fracture that we're currently experiencing, the sense of anxiety that we're currently experiencing. But perhaps someone older than me, like dear Edith Eger, who was on Under the Skin last week, Holocaust survivor, 92 years old, she would have a different perspective, a sort of a more obviously a wiser perspective, and one built from having seen administrations come and go, seen leaders come and go, even seen fascism come and please God go.
Ronald Reagan went to his parade. Jimmy Carter had surprised the nation by walking, but Mr. Reagan rode. And the parade that followed was, well, just the way inaugural parades are supposed to be.
Yuval Noah Harari had this to say when he was on Under the Skin, my podcast, talking about medieval monarchy and the power of a king. He said, the king's actual power was weak. If you're a king in England in the 12th century, you don't have a lot of power, but you try to conceal your weakness by these extravagant displays of power. So you go around with a pile of gold on your head and you wear all these furs and pearls, and every now and again you'll tell people, okay, cut off his head. And that makes people feel that the king is very powerful. But actually the king is very weak because the state is very weak. Pageantry, I suppose, is there to distract, to fortify, to inaugurate a sense of real and legitimate power, when in fact really what's happening is a kind of theatre to mask true power.
It was a lot of ceremony for one day, and there would be more tonight, but Mr. Reagan managed to squeeze in one bit of personal business. He tried out that chair in his new office. He likes it just fine, thanks.
It's been a very wonderful day. I guess now I can go back to California, can't I? It's all...
Nice, likeable, bit of fun there. Again, avuncular figures. I suppose when looking at this from a broad and psychological perspective, what you see is that the figureheads at the forefront of power structures are benign, benevolent figures that seem somewhat anodyne, even occasionally asinine and approachable. One of the things I've always said about Trump is at least he is an authentic representation of the true nature of power, in that he can be hyperbolic, aggressive, individualistic, egocentric, occasionally cut to the quick with cold, hard truth, but ultimately, in my view, and no disrespect to those of you that like him, selfish. Let's see what the inauguration of Joe Biden brings about. Certainly it seems like a return, doesn't it, to these kind of avuncular figures.
A change of presidents and style. For George Bush, the day begins with prayer at the Church of Presidents, St. John's Episcopal.
It's good that there's a Church of Presidents. I didn't know that, did you? They've got their own church on top of everything else. And it's interesting that prayer and religious anointment is a part of the ceremony. Otherwise, where is the authority derived from? With the coronation of a monarch, it's all very literal about, like, you know, this is God's power being put onto this queen, and there's like an oil and stuff that they couldn't even show on film famously in the coronation of Elizabeth II. God bless you, Mum. But with presidents, you know, where it is ostensibly a democracy and the power is derived from the people, how do you create this sense of consecration, i.e. how do you create the idea that this is sacred? Well, I suppose in rather simplistic terms, by mimicking the tropes and ideas that a more overtly religious culture would enact.
George Bush takes the oath from Chief Justice William Rehnquist.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
And the whole hand being held up thing, and I think the other hand's on the Bible. I mean, even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, you got to look at the way that even in the most secular aspects of the administration of power, we have to call upon religious ideas in a very literal way.
George Bush is the new president. Dan Quayle is the new vice president. The Bush-Quayle administration began here today amid pomp, pageantry.
Pageantry is amazing because it evokes quite powerful feelings. We're kind of encoded with this stuff. It's calling upon summoning energies, I believe, that are deep, deep within us that we can't really be dismissive of. Perhaps if you have a really adolescent, fuck you attitude to power, but it's difficult not to be sort of moved by this stuff, even when it's contextualized by a certain knowledge of what's going on. We know we're moving from war to war, Reagan, Panama, Nicaragua, Bush, Iraq. I mean, the whole thing, it's like, what goes on? These systems don't work, and that is masked by this kind of sentimentality.
The Bush-Quayle inaugural parade badge. Instead of a new breeze blowing, a stiff, cold wind.
They really love the weather, innit? And that's paganism, to sort of say that the weather augurs, as in inaugurates, a new era. Like, you know, the sun shone down on this new president, as if to say it's God is appointing this person. The obsession with weather, while it seems trivial, is actually an indication of the deeper unconscious motivations for the ceremony itself.
After the passing parade, before the inaugural balls, George Bush walks inside the White House as 41st President of the United States.
First step into
house that we'll be living in.
Where's George Bush? At that time, he'd have been proper on it, wouldn't he, in them days? That's before he was president. Oh, Daddy is becoming president. Better get her do another butt, baby.
The Democrat Bill Clinton becomes the 42nd president of the United States of America. Amid the most expensive inauguration celebrations, new president Bill Clinton, wife Hillary, and daughter Chelsea moved into the White House. Partying continued into the night.
Oh, yeah, this one plays a saxophone. We've come a long way, baby. What would it have been with some of their old farts of yesteryear? I bought my recorder. Sadly, we found out that Bill Clinton had other uses for them little old lips of ease.
As the new president promised a new era for America.
I can hold my breath for up to an hour. You can see this slow conflation of celebrity and politics sort of taking place before your eyes, with sort of daft old duffers hanging around on steps to Bill Clinton just inches away from pulling his shirt open. Eyewitness news, the bare minimum that you can offer. I actually saw this happen. I should think so, you're the fucking news.
Reporting tonight from Washington. Good evening. You've probably heard it said before today, the world's most powerful nation conducts its democracy in such a civilized way that it is almost magical.
I've not heard that ever before. The world's most powerful nation, okay, conducts its business in such a civilized way that it's almost magical. Well, no, the last bit, you could have just said anything there.
Today's inauguration of Bill Clinton was brimming with ceremony.
I don't like it being brimming with ceremony, like the ceremony is sort of slopping out and foaming over the edge, although we all remember the dress.
Across the street at the White House, George Bush had spent part of his last hours as president taking a reflective walk on the White House South grounds and visiting one last time the Oval Office, where he had left a traditional note to his successor.
All I ask is that you do not behave inappropriately with any interns in here. Shouldn't even really need this note.
And good morning. George W. Bush will be sworn in as the 43rd President of the United States today.
You know, I was thinking it's exciting, always this transition of power, but particularly so, Peter, with the two Bushes. I was at a reception last night with a few hundred other people when George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president, was introduced. And he came up and he said, you know, I used to be called George Bush. I used to be called the president. Now I don't know what the heck to call myself.
Thank you, Sam.
That's a lovely anecdote, mate. But also, I think what's been exposed is the one thing it claims to be, a transition of power, is one thing it's not. That power continues in an unbroken line, while superficially there are alterations, sometimes within one family.
The weather has been threatening. The weather forecast is actually for snow, but as you can see at the moment, it's only dank.
It's just dank. Nothing to worry about, just dank. Everything will probably be okay. Won't start any crazy wars in the Middle East that made things a lot worse and we're still dealing with the consequences of today.
The Obamas were greeted warmly on the portico of the White House by President and Mrs. Bush. Michelle Obama had a gift for the First Lady, telling her, this is for your new home.
The optics of this are the kind of thing that's pretty exciting. It's an African-American couple. Things are changing, it's real progress. You know, it's easy for us to be cynical now that we know what was achieved and what wasn't achieved under the Obama administration and the rate of increase in drone strikes, etc., which someone pointed out as somewhat as a result of the increased availability of that technology. But nonetheless, it certainly wasn't the kind of change and hope that the campaign and goodwill suggested. But at least visually, it seems like a kind of progression. And now that we've seen the inauguration of Joe Biden, we can once again see if the optical changes amount to significant real change for ordinary folk.
The National Mall was packed with a sea of humanity estimated at 2 million people seeking to witness history being made. Vice President Cheney left the White House in a wheelchair because he had pulled a muscle packing his belongings.
Fucking belongings in there. Ah! My ass!
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The simple truth, if you ask me, and it seems that you are because you're still watching the video, is that there ain't no real need or plausibility for a role such as president of a country of that size, scale, with that amount of international power. Jung, when writing about the type of ego inflation that might occur when an individual associates their personal potency with archetypal potency, Jung, of course, believing that all of us are informed by energy systems that he referred to as the archetypes, meaning they recur throughout all of us, the shaman archetype, the king archetype, the magician archetype. Yeah, there's all sorts of archetypes. A president is a king by another name. Jung defined this inflation that can occur when you're identified with the archetypal role, and indeed, in the case of a president, a public role, as an unconscious psychic condition, an expansion of the personality beyond its proper limits through identification with this archetype. Jung defined inflation further as being seized by archetypal energy, resulting in a puffed up attitude, loss of free will, delusion, and enthusiasm for good and evil alike. Sound like anyone we know? Inflation is more than a swelled head because the influx of unconscious contents leads to identification with God-like powers. The antidote to this inflation is humility, service, and love. Whether or not you're a president of a nation or just an individual human being wrestling with your own access to archetypal energies, particularly in this peculiar time of incubation and separation where psychic forces can run amok, knowing that the antidote to it is a return to humility and service is a powerful resource. And I would argue that these are the very kind of ideas that should be promoted and prevalent in the kind of cultures that we form. In fact, Sitting Bull, who was the chief of the Lakota Indians, said in an interview in 1877 in response to this journalist's question, which was, "I saw today that all the warriors around you in some ceremony clapped their hands and cried out when you spoke. They liked you. They seemed to think that what you said was right for them to say. If you are not a great chief, why do these men think so much of you?" Sitting Bull responds to his inquisitor with an inquiry. "Your people look up to men because they are rich, because they have much land, many lodges, many squaws." The journalist replies in the affirmative. Sitting Bull says, "Well, I suppose my people look up to me because I am poor." That's the difference. True leadership is a position of service. It's a position of humility. It's the recognition that your role is transitory. Many of the things are acknowledged in the inauguration ceremony, but does that ceremony induce that attitude? It remains to be seen in the case of Joe Biden, but as for some of these historic cases that we've looked at, we've seen that the weight of the office and the power of the role is too much for any of these ideals to be met, and it is the system itself that needs radical change.
And the new president and first lady joined in a moving rendition of the national anthem.
My understanding of pageantry and ceremony is that it's either an attempt to embody and reify the sacred, that which is ethereal and unknown, to bring it, to concretize it, to make it seem real, whether it's a nation or a monarchy or the instantiation of other forms of power. Watching this, we can see that there are certain things that do continue unbroken, perhaps the way that power ordinarily relates to those that are subject to that power. We have another opportunity today to see if many of the ideals that are held sacred in the American Constitution and that are brought about by this ceremony, that are celebrated by this ceremony, can actually be realized.